The backstage hallway smelled faintly of dust, old paint, and nervous sweat. It was the kind of place where dreams either took their first breath or quietly suffocated. People passed each other in silence, some rehearsing lyrics under their breath, others staring at their phones as if trying to avoid their own thoughts. Somewhere down the corridor, a door slammed. Laughter erupted from a group of teenagers. A producer called out a name. And in the middle of all that noise stood a man who looked like he didn't quite belong. His name was Mateo Reyes. He was 53 years old, thin, slightly hunched, with rough hands that told the story of decades of physical labor. His shirt was clean but clearly old, the collar soft from years of washing. His shoes were scuffed. His hair, streaked with gray, was combed carefully to the side, though a few stubborn strands refused to stay in place. In his hands, he held something small and worn, a pocket-sized Bible, its pages yellowed and frayed at the edges. Mateo wasn't pacing. He wasn't warming up. He wasn't humming scales or scrolling through social media. He was praying, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, lips barely moving, eyes closed, shoulders rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. This was not the first big stage Mateo had ever imagined, but it was the first one he had ever stood near. If you had asked Mateo 10 years earlier what his life would look like at 53, he would not have said, auditioning on a global talent show. He would have said, working construction, or cleaning floors, or doing whatever job keeps food on the table. He would have said, surviving. Mateo grew up in a small coastal town where the ocean was beautiful from a distance but merciless up close. His father was a fisherman who drank heavily. His mother sold vegetables at the market. Music, for Mateo, came from an old radio that crackled with static and the hymns sung every Sunday at a tiny church with peeling paint and wooden pews polished smooth by generations of hands. That church became his refuge. When his father came home angry, Mateo slipped out. When there wasn't enough food, Mateo slipped out. When the shouting got too loud, Mateo slipped out. He would sit in the back pew and listen to the choir practice. Those voices felt different from anything else in the world. They didn't pretend life was easy. They didn't deny pain. They seemed to rise above it. Mateo started singing quietly at first, mouthing words so no one would hear. Then one Sunday, when the choir director was short one voice, she pointed at him. "Can you sing, boy?" Mateo froze. Everyone turned. He nodded. His voice cracked on the first note. But by the second verse, something happened. The sound that came out of him didn't match the shy boy standing there. It was rich, warm, full. The church fell silent. Afterward, the choir director hugged him and said, "God gave you that voice." Mateo believed her. For a while, singing was his greatest joy. Then life happened. His mother got sick. His father disappeared. Mateo dropped out of school at 16 to work. Singing became something he did only at church. Then only in the shower. Then only in his head. Years passed. He married young, had 2 children, worked long hours cleaning office buildings at night and construction sites during the day. His hands hardened, his back bent, his dreams shrank, but one thing never left him. Every morning before work, Mateo opened his Bible. Every night before sleep, he whispered a prayer. And sometimes, when the world felt too heavy, he sang softly to God. Not for applause, not for money, not for anyone else, just to feel close to something bigger than his pain. The hardest year of Mateo's life came when his wife died from a sudden illness. The hospital bills swallowed what little savings they had. Mateo became both mother and father overnight. He cooked, he cleaned, he worked more hours, he slept less, he tried to stay strong. But strength is not an endless resource. One night, after a 16-hour shift, Mateo sat on the edge of his bed, exhausted beyond words. His youngest son was asleep in the next room. His oldest daughter was studying by candlelight because the electricity had been shut off. Mateo buried his face in his hands. And for the first time in his life, he said out loud, "God, I don't know if I can do this anymore." No thunder answered. No miracle happened. But a memory surfaced. Him, as a boy, standing in church, singing, feeling light. So he sang, quietly, shakily, a hymn his mother used to love. By the second verse, tears streamed down his face. By the final note, Something inside him felt steadier. Not fixed, not perfect, but steadier. From that night on, singing became Mateo's lifeline. Not a career, not a plan, a lifeline. Years later, his daughter moved away to work. His son followed not long after. They loved their father, but poverty has a way of pulling families apart, not because they want to leave, but because they feel they must. Mateo was proud of them. Lonely, but proud. One evening, while cleaning an office building, Mateo heard music playing from a phone someone had left behind. It was a clip from a talent show. A contestant was crying. Judges were emotional. The crowd was on its feet. Mateo stood frozen, mop in hand. For the first time in decades, a dangerous thought entered his mind. What if? He laughed out loud. What if was for other people? Young people, pretty people, people with money, not janitors in their 50s. But the thought refused to leave. Weeks passed. The thought grew louder. One Sunday after church, a visiting volunteer mentioned that auditions for a big singing show were coming to the city. Mateo felt his heart race. He told no one, not his children, not his coworkers, not even the pastor. He told God, if you want me to go, make a way. 2 days later, a coworker offered to cover Mateo's shift on audition day so Mateo could attend his son's school meeting. Mateo didn't have a school meeting, but he suddenly had a free day. He stared at the text message for a long time. His hands trembled. He whispered, okay. The audition hall was massive, bright, intimidating. Mateo almost turned around 3 times. He felt invisible among thousands of hopeful singers. Some wore flashy clothes. Some had managers. Some were filming TikToks. Mateo sat quietly in a plastic chair, clutching his Bible. When a volunteer asked what he would sing, Mateo answered, a song for Jesus. The volunteer smiled politely, as if unsure what to do with that answer, and wrote something on the clipboard. Now, backstage, Mateo waited. A producer approached him. Name, Mateo Reyes. Tell me about yourself. Mateo hesitated. I clean buildings. I have 2 children. I sing in church. Why did you come? Mateo swallowed. I came to thank Jesus. He carried me through many hard years. The producer raised an eyebrow. You're not here to win. Mateo shook his head. I'm here to sing for him. The producer didn't know what to say. When Mateo's name was called, his legs felt weak. The curtain opened. Light exploded around him. The theater was enormous. Thousands of faces blurred together. 4 judges sat behind a glowing desk. Cameras hovered silently. Mateo walked to the center of the stage. He felt small. Very small. The host smiled. Hello, sir. What's your name? Mateo. And how old are you, Mateo? 53. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. What do you do for a living? I'm a janitor. Some people nodded politely. Some looked skeptical. And what will you be singing today? Mateo took a deep breath. I will sing for Jesus. The room shifted. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. One judge leaned forward. Another tilted their head. The host smiled gently. Whenever you're ready. Mateo closed his eyes. For a moment, the theater disappeared. He wasn't on a stage. He wasn't under lights. He wasn't in front of judges. He was back in that small wooden church. A scared boy. A broken man. A grateful soul. The first note left his lips. It was soft. Barely a whisper. But it was pure, clear, honest. The microphone carried his voice across the massive room. By the second line, people stopped shifting in their seats. By the third, a hush fell over the audience. Mateo's voice was not flashy. It wasn't full of runs or tricks. It didn't show off. It told a story. Every word carried weight. Every note sounded lived in. Like it had passed through pain before reaching the air. He sang about walking through darkness. About feeling abandoned. About falling to his knees. He sang about a hand reaching down. About grace. About being loved when you feel unlovable. Tears began to appear in the audience. Not dramatic sobbing. Just quiet tears. One judge blinked rapidly. Another pressed their lips together, trying to stay composed. Mateo opened his eyes halfway through the song. He saw people crying. He saw hands covering mouths. He saw a woman in the front row clutching her chest. But Mateo wasn't singing to them. He lifted his gaze slightly upward. His voice grew stronger. Not louder. Stronger. The kind of strength that comes from surrender, not force. The final verse spoke of hope. Not the kind that promises easy answers. The kind that says, even if life is hard, you are not alone. Mateo's voice trembled, not from fear, from emotion. He held the final note. Long, steady. Then he released it. Silence. Not polite silence. Not awkward silence. A thick, heavy silence. As if no one wanted to break the moment. Then, somewhere in the audience, a person stood. They dropped to their knees. Another followed. Then another. Not in unison. Not organized. One by one. People kneeling. Heads bowed. Hands clasped. Some crying openly. Some whispering prayers. Some simply sitting frozen, tears streaming. The judges were stunned. One judge had their hand over their mouth. Another was wiping tears from their cheeks. The host stood completely still. Mateo looked out and saw people kneeling. His eyes widened. His hands began to shake. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't planned anything. He hadn't come to start a movement. He had only come to sing. Overwhelmed, Mateo slowly sank to his own knees on the stage. He bowed his head, and quietly said, "Thank you, Jesus." The applause didn't explode immediately. It started softly, a few claps, then more. Then the entire theater rose to its feet. A standing ovation like a wave crashing forward. Loud, sustained, unstoppable. Mateo stayed kneeling, tears falling onto the stage floor. The host finally spoke, voice trembling. "Mateo, I don't even know what to say." One judge leaned into their microphone. "I've heard thousands of singers in my life. Technical singers, trained singers, perfect singers. But what you have is something you cannot teach." Another judge added, "You didn't perform. You ministered." The third judge wiped their eyes. "You reminded us why music exists." The toughest judge sat quietly for a moment before speaking. "Mateo, you walked out here as a janitor. But tonight, you stood here as a messenger." Mateo shook his head. "I'm just a servant." The judge smiled softly. Sometimes servants carry the most powerful messages. The votes were unanimous. 4 yeses. But it didn't feel like a competition anymore. It felt like something else. Entirely. Backstage, people hugged Mateo. Crew members cried. Contestants thanked him. A producer whispered, "I've never seen anything like that." Mateo called his daughter. She answered groggily, "Papa, I sang today." "Where?" "On television." Silence. Then, "Papa, what?" "I sang for Jesus." She started crying. His son called minutes later. "Dad, everyone is talking about you." Mateo didn't understand. Overnight, the video spread. Millions of views, headlines, clips shared everywhere. People wrote comments like, "I haven't prayed in years. This made me pray. I was going to give up. I won't now. I don't even believe in God, but I felt something." Mateo didn't read most of them. He didn't own a smartphone. He didn't care about fame. He went back to work the next week. His supervisor tried to give him time off. Mateo declined. "I like to work." But something had changed. People recognized him. Strangers hugged him. Some asked for photos. Some asked for prayers. Mateo always said yes. In later rounds of the show, Mateo continued to sing. Sometimes he advanced. Sometimes he didn't. But it didn't matter. Because Mateo had already accomplished what he came to do. He had sung for Jesus. Months later, a small church invited Mateo to sing. Then another. Then another. Not huge arenas. Not glamorous venues. Small churches. Hospitals. Shelters. Prisons. Places where people were hurting. Mateo felt more at home there than on any big stage. One night, after singing at a shelter, a young man approached him. "I was planning to end my life tonight," the man said quietly. Mateo felt his knees go weak. "But when you sang, I felt like God was telling me to stay." Mateo hugged him tightly. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Years later, people would still talk about the moment when a simple janitor sang and an entire audience fell to their knees. But Mateo would always describe it differently. "I didn't make anyone kneel," he would say. "God touched hearts. I just opened my mouth." And every morning, before anything else, Mateo still opened his old Bible. Every night, before sleep, he still whispered a prayer. And sometimes, when the world felt heavy, he still sang. Not for cameras, not for crowds, Not for fame, but for Jesus. The same way he always had. The same way he always would.